Mic check one. Oh my goodness, you can hear my voice. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. There's a little awkward blur there, but we're waiting for the technology to kick in. So I get to warm you up as a crowd, the intro to the main act. In the meantime, so for those of you who don't know who I am, I've awkwardly introduced myself several times outside. And we all made sure if you drink, you got something to drink. If you drink the softer things, you got something to drink. So we've cut the awkwardness now. So please turn to somebody in the row behind you and say hi. That is your first instruction. Turn around and say hi to the person behind you. And then in turn to the person, make sure you met a name. I need to do names. This is what I need to do. All right. Have you met somebody new? All right. Name, age, social security number, date of birth, marital status, how many times they've gone to jail. That's all I need to know. Make sure you've got enough information from all the people. Good. All right. We've met somebody new. Have you turned to the person next to you and said hi? All right. Okay, good. The person next to you, we've said hi. Good. All right. This is great. Okay. So this means by the end of tonight, you would have gone home with a new Instagram handle. That's not just Future Barbados, at Future Barbados on all the social medias. Or you have somebody else next to you. You have an email address. I don't know if people do phone numbers anymore. I'm not sure where that lies. So by the end of today, you will leave with something new. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen and people of the world. Is it 7:25 yet, team? Is it 7:25 yet? How many more seconds? 30 more seconds. All right, everybody, we're going to count down. And I'm going to pretend it's 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. Ready? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we are live on YouTube for the first time. Welcome, everyone, to Future Barbados Ignite series. Ooh! You all know I love the drama. Ladies and gentlemen, people of the world, my name is Tamaisha Eitel. I am the director of Future Barbados. Future Barbados, for those of you who don't know or who have not been part of our community, and I would turn the volume down slightly, even though my voice is really loud. It's great. Future Barbados started as an idea to inspire a new generation of thinkers and doers and dreamers. Future Barbados today has evolved into this engine, an engine that seeks to do three things. One, enhance the capital to make things happen. To be extraordinary, we have to do extraordinary things with extraordinary people and extraordinary networks. The second thing we need to do is to be not afraid to play. We love to experiment, we like to fail, and we like to constantly try. And finally, what you need to do all of this is a community of people who don't normally speak to each other, a community of people who would never be in the same room. And so, ladies and gentlemen, people of the world, welcome to our community of Future Barbados. Good job, team. Good job, team. Good job, team. I appreciate you. And the cameramen already hate me. You should have given me marks to stay behind. So thank you to our Ignite Chat series. The purpose of the Ignite Chat series is to have these fun conversations and to meet cool people. We've been trying to toy with this for a couple of years now. Initially, we were on Zoom because of the C word. And now we've tried to bring people in person to have these cool conversations and bring people who love Barbados, who want to inspire, who want to talk about new different things. And today, I would love to welcome our very special guest. I will not give a bio because we'll learn that in the talk. Micheal Sheldrick. Woo! So I encourage you to listen. The exciting part of today is that it's the Barbados leg of his book tour, And it's important to know why his book is touring here. But when you buy the book, you'll find out, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So I'm going to sit down in my comfy chair. Thank you to the setup of the comfy chairs. All right. Welcome again, everybody. So we're going to learn a little bit about Micheal, myself. We're going to make this a very casual chat. So if you have questions in between, there's a Q&A as well. So let's kick it off. Welcome to Barbados.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back here in Barbados.
Back here. So when was your first time in Barbados?
My first time was July 2022, because I remember it well, because my wife is sat at the front here, and my parents had just arrived. So we got married at the end of that year. My parents had just arrived in New York to meet her parents, who was with us. And you mentioned the C word. So my parents got off the plane, knocked at the door in Brooklyn, and my dad goes, my mum comes in. I'm like, where's Dad? Turns out he had the C word. And it was like, nice to meet you, surprise. Meanwhile, I was a bit of a bad, I guess, future husband, because I said to my then fiance, I said, well, good luck, and got on the plane and came here to Bridgetown, Barbados. And she still married me after that. So there you go.
And they have a 6-month-old, so clearly they're in this. So, Micheal, I want you to tell us your origin story. So I'm a superhero fan. I like to believe that Future Barbados likes to rally unicorns and superheroes together. And so I want to know where you come from. Like, what's the deal? Like, what's your origin story?
What's my superpower?
What is your superpower?
Well, let me first start then with what isn't my superpowers, or what wasn't, because I think sometimes it takes time to discover our superpowers. And, you know, I was born, so very different part.
I'm glad you were born. That's important. Good.
Different part of the world on the other side, Perth, Western Australia, which is the most isolated city in the world. And I know Barbadians love their cricket, so you probably know Perth, you probably know the Waka.
Just know June 2024 ICC Cricket World Cup happening in Barbados.
Which I believe Australia are the second favourites for.
Oh, I'm glad you knew which team. Good. Second favourites, we'll take it. Good.
So when I'm in New York, though, I often say to New Yorkers that the best way to figure out where Perth is if from New York you drill a hole through the ground, through the core of the earth, you came out the other side, that would land you in Perth, Western Australia. So we now live in New York, and you couldn't think of a further away location. And so when I was born, got to school, like you do, primary school, and I struggled. I was not good at sports, which in Australia, talking of cricket, is like blasphemy. And when I say I was bad at sports, I was really bad at sports. So in Australia, we also have this other sport called Aussie rules football, which, you know, is kind of like we have an oval-shaped ball, sort of like, you know, American football mixed with rugby. And I would go out on the oval, and I would go to kick the ball. And whereas most kids would be hoping that they scored the goal and praying to God that they scored the goal, I was sat there just praying to kick the ball in the right direction. Like, just put it in perspective. I would be sat there going, please, I don't even want to score the goal. I just want to kick this football in the right direction and have it miss like an ordinary goal and be completely unnoticed. And sure enough, there I would be, petrified on the oval, all the kids looking at me, and I would kick the ball, something weird would happen, and it would fly off in the other direction, and all the kids would laugh, right? So I was that kid. And when it came to academics, I wasn't that great at academics either. I remember start of high school, my first teacher in high school sitting my mum down and saying, Micheal is bottom of the class. Yeah, bottom of the class.
That's encouraging.
Yeah,
yes.
Not only that, but said the way Michael's going, he's not even going to finish high school, let alone get into university, right? And you know what? Like, people say
beautiful
to me,
plan.
Beautiful plan. Mm-hmm. And people say to me, well, that's not encouraging. Were you alarmed by that? And I said, no, not really, because I didn't have any real sense of aspiration throughout my body. Like, sometimes people set so low expectations of you that rather than rising above them, you live down to those expectations. Until one day, we did this in class assignment. We could write about any movie. And the movie Gladiator had just come out in Australia with Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe would inspire anybody, let me tell you.
Well, maybe the Russell Crowe 20 years ago. People say, have you seen him now? Oops, sorry. No, Russell's great. He's an incredible guy. So I wrote this essay, didn't think anything of it, got home from school, and my mum has a weird, confused look in her eye. And she says, there's a message for you on the answer machine. So I listened to this message, and it's from this Year 8 teacher, Mr. Byrne, and it goes something like this. Hi, Mrs. Sheldrick. I've noticed a change in Michael. Can you give me a call back? And I thought, yeah, that's a kind of strange, slightly creepy message. What have I done wrong, right? And the reason why Mum had this confused look in her eye is after years of people saying Michael's stupid, lazy, a loser, is not going to amount to anything, he had said, geez, Michael somehow topped the class, and we had no idea how he did it. So next day, get into school, Mr. Byrne says to me, he goes, you know, I think there's more to you than meets the eye. You may not believe in yourself, but I tell you, I believe in you. And he said, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to work with you. You're going to work with me. We're going to commit our recesses. You're going to come in after school. And if you do all of that, by the end of this year, you will be number one in the class. And I thought, wow, okay. I still don't believe it, but what the heck, I'll give it a go. So long story short, get to the end of school, and second last day, a car rocks up at my driveway, and it's Mr. Byrne, jumps out, and I'm like, why are you here? Why are you here at my home, Mr. Byrne? And in a very Aussie way, outstretches his hand, and he goes, well done, mate. Well done. And he gives me this certificate with a number 1 on it, which my mum still has to this day. And 4 years later, finish high school in the top 1% of the state. I can study anything. I get into law school. And suddenly people are like, wow, you're so smart. You're so intelligent. And I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because I remembered what it was to feel like that kid at the start of high school who everyone thought was stupid, lazy, wasn't going to amount to anything. And I remember the difference that that teacher made in my life. And I guess you could say it was out of the awareness of that and the gratitude, and upon reflection, getting into university, this broader awareness in the world that millions of children around the world, far more intelligent, capable than I am, because they don't have a great teacher like Mr. Byrne, or maybe they don't have access to a school meal every day, so they're stunted and can't absorb the information, or maybe the kind of stupid poverty which still exists in part of the world, where when girls hit their puberty, they have to drop out of school because of something as basic as lacking a sanitary pad or tampon or napkin. But whatever it was, kids wouldn't be able to achieve their potential. And so I thought, that's what I want to do. And I guess, long story short, because you're like, well, this all sounds like stuff you're bad at. What's your superpower? So I get into I get into university, and I decide I'm going to organize a quiz night at my old high school. And it turns out one thing I am good at is by asking for free stuff. Not good at many things, but I know how to make an ask. And so I go around my shopping center. I go to McDonald's, the equivalent of Starbucks in Australia. I ask for all this free stuff, book vouchers, whatever you call it, Happy Meal vouchers, all of it. And I raffle this away at this quiz night, and we raise $1,000. And that's to build a school in Papua New Guinea, just north of Australia. And then quickly, in my summers and winters, I had the opportunity to go to India, Bangladesh, Timor-Leste. And one thing I quickly discovered is, okay, it's great that you've built bricks and mortar, but who's paying the teacher's salary for a year? Who's paying for those meals every day? Who's paying for adolescent girls to have reliable access to period products, right? Who's doing all of that? And then who's doing that, not just in that country or that region or that town, but who's doing that around the world? And you realize that no amount of gala night, charity dinners, or quiz nights is going to raise the billions needed to end extreme poverty, because it's a systemic challenge, and systemic challenges require systemic solutions. And I guess that's where I understood the answer was policy. And then getting back to university, met the other co-founders of Global Citizen. And it was from there we said, okay, well, how can we as individuals shape policy to end extreme poverty?
So that's really interesting. And when I invited Mick, I said, for a lot of people, policy is really boring. Like, you don't really care about policy half the time because it doesn't seem to impact, like, if I can pay my bills on the weekend, it feels to be like the politician thing and the UN thing to do. And I remember thinking, trying to grapple with myself, why is it important? Because I'm a student of international relations, so naturally I gravitate to nerds and save the world people like Mike, but I wanted to make sure it would resonate with different people. And then I remember learning about Global Citizen, and I want you to kind of talk to the audience who may not know anything about Global Citizen through that. About Global Citizen has been able to marry pop culture, people, and partnerships and policy all at the same time. Because what you tend to see is that you'll get a celebrity endorsement for something, but that doesn't lead to anything. Or you'll get a politician to say something, and a paper is written, and it lives on a PDF in somebody's desk. But you've never been able to see the action part of policy. And so when I actually read his book, you all should read it after this, it was interesting to learn like the lessons that you shared in the book, this kind of playbook you've written, but how your experience through Global Citizen has married the cool, hip things with the really boring things that seem so out of reach. So if you can talk us through that kind of journey.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're right. When we talk about policy, it sounds so abstract, it sounds vague, and it sounds impenetrable. Like when you ask someone how they can make a difference, usually the responses you get is, okay, I can donate to charity. I can volunteer my time. Maybe I can plant some trees. Maybe I can even change my own personal behavior, right? I can, walk more, drive less, all of these sorts of changes.
No more straws.
Yeah, and in your America, you can register to vote. You can have conversations. There's a bunch of things you can do. But rarely does it come to mind the answer you get, I want to change policy, right? And yet policy is all around us, right? Policy impacts us on a daily basis. I was just having a conversation before with someone from the Diabetes Foundation of Barbados, and I was reflecting in Australia how very few young people now smoke as a result of policies put in place a decade ago. During the pandemic, during the first year when most of humanity was locked down for a period of time, global emissions fell, even when none of us were catching planes, none of us were moving, most of us were doing barely anything, locked in our homes, and yet global emissions fell by I think, at most 6 to 8%, right? And so you realize, wow, okay, if we're going to address these issues like climate change, this is big systemic changes. And I guess the thing I've learned, and really where the book is designed for, is yes, you can be in government, an elected official. You can be a prime minister like your prime minister, Mia Mottley, who's certainly made her dent on the world stage. You can also be someone like Taylor Swift or Coldplay. You can be a business leader, but you can also be an ordinary citizen, right? And so the book is designed as an 8-point plan. It's not designed, and it doesn't profess to have all of the answers, but it does aim to give people a start, whether it's addressing challenges ranging from plastics in the ocean, illegal deforestation, artificial intelligence. It's a plan on how we can get all involved, because I genuinely believe, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, the best way to begin is to begin. And if you can get more people taking action and their friends and family, that will trigger some forward momentum. But let me bring this home in a way, because you mentioned Global Citizens model, pop and policy. Because when we got back to Australia, I mentioned when we realized that, yes, no amount of charitable donations in the world is going to raise the billions needed to end extreme poverty, right? Nelson Mandela said that poverty is not natural, it's man-made. And it can only be eradicated by the actions of human beings, not by acts of charity, but by acts of justice. And within that, when we got together, we said, well, how do we mainstream these issues, right? And we used, when Global Citizen got started, it was right on the cusp of social media coming about, and it was right on the cusp of using both social media and the power of popular culture. But I want to give a very specific example where, because people will talk about global citizen, and they say, wow, it's great, you've mobilized over 33 million citizen actions through the power of popular culture, which has helped unlock $40 billion, which has helped impact the lives of more than 1 billion lives around the world. But a very practical example in the book, I say that one thing we can all do is figure out our superpowers, what's our shortfall, and then leverage the strength of others. And so in 2018, I've spoken a lot about period products, right? Period poverty. The reason why I talk about that issue is, this Wednesday, the 28th of May, will be Menstrual Equity Hygiene Day around the world. It's an important day. 500 million women and girls still lack access to period products and live in and often get pushed into period poverty, which means they have to drop out of school. And how I first became aware of this in a big way and the impact on education was in 2018. So Global Citizen, we were asked by the family of Nelson Mandela, the South African government, in 2018 to mobilize a campaign to mark the centenary of Nelson Mandela, arguably the greatest global citizen of all time. They said, we want you to do this big campaign. We want you to do this big event. And we brought Jay-Z, Beyonce, Oprah
Nobody.
Winfrey.
He brought nobody.
All
Nobody
these big names. Ed Sheeran, and then we had
blah,
some of the biggest names in the world from Nigeria, Tiwa Savage, Femi Kuti. So we got together in Johannesburg, and when we announced that campaign, there were 3 hashtags trending. The first was Mandela 100. The second was Beyonce, because everyone loves Beyonce. And then the third was It's Bloody Time. So we looked into who was driving this campaign, It's Bloody Time. And when it came down to it, it was these young advocates, these individuals, and they were seeking to hijack our platform. They were coming to us and asking for help. And they said, you realize that girls in South Africa, when we don't have access to period products, we can lose up to 60 days a year of education of school. And they said, there's 2 basic things that we can do. The first is to remove period products from the tax code, because believe it or not, around the world, they're often taxed as luxury goods. And they said, the second thing we can do is to make it available for free in schools. So we, of course, when we said, okay, we'll take this up, let's take this up as an issue. Well, you can imagine how that went down with some folks in the government. They said, this is not worthy of Nelson Mandela's time. This is a small trivial issue. This is not a great issue. But I can tell you it very quickly became the #1 issue of the campaign. Millions of people got involved. And I can tell you, when we walked into this meeting with one of the ministers, and these girls, or young women, I should say, slammed this petition down on the table, the whole table shook, right? And the story of that, and this is where you, to your point, when you follow something through to the end, not only did at that event, and there was also almost a moment where it didn't happen, President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Oprah Winfrey is introducing him, and we find out his speech has nothing to do with responding to this campaign, nothing at all responding. He's got 100,000 people, he's about to go on stage, and I remember these advocates saying, you cannot do that, Mr. President. You made a promise. You said you would do something. They're out there. They've taken action. They've expected it. So, of course, he comes out. He makes a promise. He said, I've heard the call of the girl child. And he commits to providing, putting money on the table to provide this in schools. And to your point, that was 6 years ago. And the only reason that mattered, the only reason that made a difference is these young women took it upon themselves. They made sure months later that they tracked that, because when you get off the stage, people clap themselves on the back, they have a nice lunch, they leave, but they made sure that the dollars were in the budget. They made sure that over time, even during the pandemic, that the money went up. And through that work, working with everyone, even people they didn't agree with, they made sure that 4 million girls now have access to period products. And that's 4 million girls that might have had to drop out of school. And I can tell you that these girls, when they saw the absence of leadership, not only did they take it and they asked others, and I think that's an important thing. You don't need to recreate the wheel. You can ask others. But not only did they do that, but literally one of these young advocates, Candice, literally took upon herself and said, I'm going to call myself the Minister for Menstruation for South Africa, which I think is a pretty cool title.
So that really makes policy, because they made sure it became a policy of the government, feel real and tangible to somebody's everyday life. And I know in the book, and I want to shout out to Alex Downs, he is in the book and mentioned, and you talked me through how you found out about the fall of Nelson. For those of you who don't know, the statue in Bridgetown is a moment in Michael's book. So I want you to tell the audience about how you saw that link between, in a small island, we don't have 4 million people, we don't have a billion people or a billion lives. What could that look like in our context?
Yeah. It's interesting. So I met Alex the second time I was in Barbados. We took a drive. He was very kind of me because I said, okay, this time I better go back, make sure my father-in-law has rum this time. So we decided to go to the Mount Gay distillery up the northern part of the island. And along there, I was basically speaking to him about his story. And he told me about the story of the statue of Horatio Nelson when George Floyd died in America, which was 4 years ago this weekend, how that played out, the global reckoning of history being reinterpreted and his role within that. But what struck me is in the book, I talk about the fact that right now, I talk about this idea of policy entrepreneurship. Ultimately, a policy entrepreneur is someone that gets things done. And sometimes getting things done means engaging with people who you may not always agree with. It means engaging with people you may not always like. And in the book, I call this the purity test, right? Where sometimes we're so afraid, fear from our own tribe, that if we engage with this particular individual or idea or organization, we're going to be cast a traitor or accused of treachery.
Or this loud advocate who just throws placards at people.
Exactly. And a policy entrepreneur is someone that bucks that trend. And they say, listen, it might all be well and good to feel right, righteous, certain, and safe. We might get a dopamine high by going on social media, policing what other people are saying. But at the end of the day, are we creating impact? Are we actually changing things? And I guess what struck me with Alex's story is, so much of the imagery globally of when statues were taken down was this whole idea of them being torn down, divisiveness, and really what he told me, and I don't want to speak for people, this is your country, how that played out. So I'm only saying how I understood it relayed to me, but it was this idea that we're proud that Barbados is a country of the rule of law. We're going to do this the right way, and we're going to have that removed, but we're going to go through the processes the right way, and we're going to do this in accordance because this is our country, we're proud of it, and this is our traditions. And it just struck me that pragmatism, and I call it pragmatic idealism, the two go together because pragmatism without idealism is vacuous. But it just struck me that that's what we need more of. And in the book, I share so many stories of where ideas have been turned into impact, talk into action. And that is often the hallmark of all of those stories, where you've been willing to buck the purity test and work with those you don't always agree with.
And that's really interesting when you frame it as a policy entrepreneur, because looking around the room in the darkness that I can't see behind the lights, I know there are lots of people who are scared entrepreneurs, who are self-defined entrepreneurs, who are entrepreneurs, small business owners, technologists, climate activists. I see data, I see tech, I see healthcare, I see our typical Save the World UN folks in the room. I see the Diabetes Association. I see people from the tourism industry, some of the law industry, and some from the creative industry. But, policy entrepreneurs seem like the most boring people out of all of those cool things I just mentioned. But as I'm hearing you talk, it's this need to break the silos and need to be willing to do and put in the work. And whatever you label yourself, we have to have these conversations across the board is what we need to do. But it's hard to have those conversations. It's hard to find the right moment. You know, when is the right moment to have an AI policy for the Caribbean? When is the right moment to update your healthcare policy because of where things are going? And how do you, in your time of being, you are a policy entrepreneur in my state, and as I read the book, I realized you have found moments, including the Bridgetown Initiative. Read the book, you'll find out more. And partnering with these global big changing. Talk to me about like a time when you found it very hard, like that really difficult, when you're like, I want to just become a lawyer and make money doing law. Like when did that happen? Talk me through that.
I'm not sure if there was ever a time I felt that. Sorry for all the lawyers out there. But in Australia, in my part of the world, it mostly is mining contracts and that sort of thing. Yeah. Look, I would say, you know, and I commend what you're trying to do with Future Barbados. I really do. And as I looked over the website preparing for this talk, I saw many of the buzzwords that comes from policy entrepreneur, right? And it's funny because people ask, where did that term come from? And others have used that term. And some people say it's like an oxymoron. A climate negotiator said to me earlier this year that, you know, policy in their terms is like obsessing about where a full stop or a
oh my gosh, those are the
or
most
a comma.
annoying meetings.
Semantics, and it doesn't seem to go hand in hand with entrepreneurship, right? And it was funny, like when Global Citizen, this model of using unconventional means, bringing people together, mainstreaming these issues, leveraging the power of popular culture, committing to doing and not just raising awareness of the problem, but focused on solutions. So after our very first campaign in 2011, right, we didn't know if we were going to exist or not. Like we thought we had done this great campaign, but you know what, when you come to America, and anyone here who's tried to do something in America, we went to New York because that's where the UN was based, they will know that no amount of good work we had done anywhere else in the world, in Australia, the initial response was, well, that's good you've done all that in Australia, but none of that matters here, right? It was basically starting from scratch. So as we were applying for grants on how to get Global Citizen off the ground, you know, my backup strategy was, okay, well, I don't want to work as a lawyer, so what am I going to do? Having clerked in my summers over the semester. And so I'd reached out and I was going to study public policy, actually. And I was with one of my professors at the time.
Shocking, he was going into policy. Oh,
well,
who knew?
I thought we could disrupt the process, right? And I thought, okay, if it's too early to get funds to get Global Citizen off the ground, because every idea has its moment, right? I thought maybe I can do some good in terms of studying this. And as I was trying to speak to my university lecturer, explaining what this was, he said, oh, you're basically a policy entrepreneur. And the good news is we got our grant funding, moved to New York, and didn't have to worry about that. But in the back of my mind, the term was always there. And so when I was writing the book, that's where it came from. But I think, you know, one of the terms that you focused a lot on in Future Barbados is this concept of moonshots, right? And in the book, I talk about the power of boldly, naively audacious goals. And I do believe that if you have an idea that is well articulated, and in the book I talk about how to identify good policy goals using the SMART criteria. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it relevant? If it's time-bound? All of these things. But if you've got that idea, right, especially now when people are yearning for solutions, they're learning for stories of how, then that can rally people even to overcome any lack of access to power, lack of access to funding, or lack of implementation experience. And to your point, my darkest moments where we were getting this off the ground, one of our very first campaigns, you know, I, through one way or another, had written this letter outlining our goal. At the time, it was to make polio the second human disease in history to be eradicated. And there was a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting taking place in Australia. It was to get this on the agenda, and Australia had stopped funding this disease. Why polio, by the way? Well, because we thought extreme poverty was too abstract, too big a goal that we thought we're focused on something specific like polio on the premise that there's no better way to show people that the end of extreme poverty is possible than to say, hey, look, we've just eradicated this disease. And we were introduced to it by a few amazing Rotarians who do some great work. So as I'm clerking at this law firm, pondering, okay,
meaning of life,
pondering this is it for me, this is the future. I write up this letter to articulate
Microsoft Word
the goal.
1995.
Exactly.
Yes. Word
exactly.
perfect. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Oh, maybe, was it 95?
98.
Maybe I'm not that old. So we write up this letter and we send it in. And I try going around, getting in front of whoever I can. And I think in Barbados you might appreciate this, because when I tell this in America, they can't comprehend this story because to them America is so big. Whereas the great thing about coming from Perth is it's 6 degrees of separation. Everyone knows everyone. So I go to a university lecture with this letter, and I've addressed it to the Prime Minister, first female Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. And there's a member of Parliament speaking, similar audience like this, and I thought, great, I've got one. And 90% of advocacy is about showing up, right? So I go to this member of Parliament, convince her to take this letter. Honestly, she just probably wanted to get rid of me. So she's like, yeah, of course I'll hand it to the Prime Minister. 2 weeks later, I'm at my university cafe, and I get a call from a block number, and it goes like this. Hi, Michael, the Prime Minister's going to be in town next week. How would you like a phone call? How would you like a meeting based on the contents of your letter? And I thought, well, I'm not going to say no to that. So I go in, and it's my most rehearsed thing ever. I'm like really getting the contents of this letter, memorizing it over 10 minutes, sit opposite the Prime Minister, and I remember she's looking at me straight in the eyes, and I was flustered at first, didn't know what to say, and she just looks at me and she very calmly says, Michael, I'm on my 3rd shot of Red Bull for the evening. If you don't mind, get on with it.
Oh,
okay. So I deliver the letter, the contents, make my pitch. I can't even remember what I said, but basically asking her if she would put polio on the agenda because usually these summits are meaningless. They don't produce anything. And she turned around and she said, I'm interested in this idea, but I want something from you. And so what do you mean? You're the most powerful person in the country. It's your summit, not mine. I'm just a university student. And she goes, no. At the end of the day, politicians, you think we can just click our fingers and everything's okay? No. She said, I need permission to spend what is in the end your money. And I don't know where the idea came from, but for whatever reason, I said, what about an event? What about a concert? We'll bring young people together. We'll get them the night before the summit. We'll show how popular this issue is. We'll make it popular with the young people. And she said, well, if you can do that, we've got a deal. And so I very quickly, before I left, I walked back and I said, oh, by the way, can you commit that to write-in? She said, sure, I'll send you a letter. I walk out there and I'm like, oh no.
You got a concert called Beyonce.
Well.
Did you have her on speed dial?
No.
Was it BBM in those days?
No, I had none of that. I had none of that. I had been to one concert in my life at that point. It was a Bon Jovi concert.
Ooh,
well, partly also, partly no one comes. No, this was like 2008. Partly it's Perth, Western Australia, and at that point it takes about 2 decades for people to reach us. Yes. No joke. So, and that's assuming they do come, right? Anyway, so I'm walking out and I'm like, I know next to nothing about music concerts. I know next to nothing about organizing events. You have to understand, we talked about superpowers. Events wasn't one of my superpowers. Good. I had organized...
football category.
No, exactly, in the football category. I had organized in Australia, we call it sausage sizzle, which is like a barbecue. I remember organizing one with about 50 people coming along, most of them seeing these cold sausages and promptly leaving. That was my experience.
Wow.
But anyway.
Inspiring.
Well, where I come back to, and the reason why I tell this story is the power of moonshots, the power of boldly, naively audacious goals. So I just put this out there. email all the largest NGOs, Oxfam, World Vision, the UN in Australia. I'm like, can you help us? And of course, most of them either don't reply to me or get back and say no. Then I get this phone call one day, and I'm sat on park bench at university, and it's from this American woman. She's from Utah. She's organized benefit concerts. She went to Hawaii, was surfing, met her husband from Queensland, moved to Australia, and was drop dead bored, basically. And she said, do you really think this is going to happen? And I said, yeah, if we do this campaign, I think it will. And then she scored me. She said, how many staff do you have? And I said, oh, well, I'm tutoring at university, so these guys are going to help. And she goes, wait, your students or your volunteers, your team? I said, yeah. And then she goes, okay, what about artists? I said, oh, well, my friend, and this is a real story, my friend's, he's in a band, and his manager was once at a concert with, I think it was Sting or someone from 20 years ago, and said he might know Sting somehow. And then she goes, dollars in the door. How are you actually going to pay for this? And I do remember, I don't know what I was thinking, but I said, I've convinced the local Indian restaurant to provide meals for all the volunteers.
Oh, we have check. Yes.
And then she goes, do you even have enough to pay me? And I said, well, I was kind of hoping you might volunteer your time.
Yes.
Right. So,
I've had many of these.
so she rings me back and she goes, you know what? You honestly think there's something about this. You think this idea would happen. I've gotten a lot of job offers, but if we can actually raise tens of millions of dollars to do some good in the world, then I'm in. And cut a long story short, 6 months later, we had this concert. We managed to convince, not quite Rihanna or anyone at this stage, but it's close enough. We convinced John Legend.
Okay.
John Legend, yeah.
Yes.
We had convinced John Legend to fly all the way to Australia. He spent more time flying than what he was on the ground for to Australia. And interestingly, this guy had reached out from California, this Californian filmmaker, an entrepreneur, Ryan Gore. And he said, to be honest, I was still worried that no one would come to this event, right? So I wasn't going to charge for tickets. We wanted to show it was popular. And he said, you know, Live Aid was so old school. They charged for tickets. They raised millions. You're trying to raise tens of millions. You're trying to turn this on its head. And he said, have you thought about gamifying advocacy? Get people to sign a petition to the Prime Minister, and in doing so, they go in the draw to earn a ticket to your concert. So anyway, we had this amazing event. 25,000 people signed a petition, 5,000 tickets. Literally, the night before, we get invited to this press conference with the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, I think it was David Cameron, Prime Minister of Canada, President of Nigeria, Prime Minister of Pakistan. She commits $50 million, and collectively they contribute $118 million. And I remember walking out side by side with Julia Gillard. In this moment, I remember saying, wow, we made this deal. I kept my word, and more to the point, you actually kept your word, and here we are, we're changing the world. And I think she patted me on the shoulder as if to say, you're so cute, or something. And, and literally 9 months later from that trial run, we were standing on the great lawn of Central Park with 60,000 people, with Neil Young, the Foo Fighters, for what was the first global citizen festival.
I get really those are the kind of audacious goals are things we think every day. I know my team is here, and many of us here have had these ridiculous conversations and made these promises way beyond what we at that time could do, and we've made it happen. So hearing it from your perspectives gives us hope for the bigger audacious goals that we're going to set. And I don't want to hog all the questions, so if you have any, start bubbling, throw your hands up in the air as I ask him one final question. If there are no questions, don't be awkward. You can ask him outside after this, and there's food and drinks back outside. But I want you to do 2 things. One, recommend a book that's not yours, or a movie or a podcast we should all watch or listen to, or a song even. Hey. And then I want you to give a challenge to everybody in this room.
Okay, so on the challenge, and I'll come back to the second one because I do want to commend what you're trying to do, and we had this conversation over lunch yesterday, and I think Barbados is incredible. This is my third time here in 2 years. I love the culture, I love the energy, I love the vibrancy. And obviously since then, not only have we worked together with Barbados globally, but I also, we've managed to work with the likes of obviously Rihanna and others, and you kind of have this larger-than-life impact on the world. And I just want to give a shout-out for what you're trying to do, because I think, grappling with all these issues in the world, whether it's artificial intelligence or new technologies, people worry about, okay, what's the downside of these technologies? What's going to happen with the jobs? And I believe that it's purpose-driven entrepreneurs who are trying to say, yes, we might be trying to make a business that employs people, but if we can actually drive at a core a mission which produces something which is beneficial to society, that leverages technology for good, then I believe that's how we're going to address extreme poverty, address jobs, and turn countries like Barbados into literally incubators for these entrepreneurs. And where there's an intersection with policy is what many of these entrepreneurs would say, since writing the book, whether it's entrepreneurs in sustainable tourism, in music, in culture, in renewable energy, in climate resiliency, in global health, they will all say that they reached a point where they realized they needed the right frameworks, the right policy, the right regulations to embark on an equal level playing field. And often those policies don't require a lot of money, right? And you were telling me yesterday that the good thing you have the buy-in where you can attract entrepreneurs around the world. You want to address this problem. You want to found this enterprise. We can help you establish the policy settings. And just to drive this home, like I've spoken a lot about music and popular culture tonight, but believe it or not, I learned this the other day, right? We've started working on what could be the world's first sustainable music tour across Africa, working with Kendrick Lamar, right? We did it in Rwanda. We're now looking at Ghana this year. And I learned the other day that if you added up the value of the entire music industry, every single song ever made, whether it's Rihanna, whether it's the Beatles, whether it's Michael Jackson, it really doesn't matter. The value of music to date is $41 billion. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but it's 1/16 of what the US spends annually on military and defense. And it should be a lot higher. And the reason why it's not is because of a lack of policy. In many countries around the world, particularly in the global south, whether it's Nigeria, which is driving much of the music we consume around the world, or whether it's other countries, creatives and musicians lose out on the revenue they need, which we look at music as just a cultural nicety, right? But music alone, I spoke to the Nigerian culture minister who's trying to shift her economy away from oil revenues. She said there's no reason why music couldn't be responsible for 10% of their entire economy, lifting people out of poverty, providing jobs and economic development. And often one simple policy change that we don't think of is intellectual property rights. Many musicians in the global south are forced to register their intellectual property for music in places like America, and it means their countries and they themselves miss out on revenue, and their country misses out on tax revenue. And this is something that could be solved with a few policy changes and harnessing the power of music. And I just think, like, what you're trying to do, I look at the entrepreneurs, whether it's in creative industry or others, this is a place where you could do that quite fast. So I want to give a shout out to you on that piece. And I guess my challenge is to people here and listening to this online is to, if you are thinking about a problem, if you're grappling with a problem, challenge yourself to think through and identify what is the solution, because good ideas come from anywhere and you just have to identify them. And I promise you that once you do identify that idea, and you can take it through the steps I've outlined in the book to say, okay, is this a concrete policy goal that's capable of being turned into impact? Because some ideas are half-baked, but if you can get that, then you can quite quickly mobilize and overcome the barriers through the power of asking, whether that's working with you or others. And one way I'm sure that we live in a moment where we all have the power to do this in a way that we didn't 80 years ago. When I was finishing the book, so my wife and I, shortly after I started writing the book last year, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write down these 8 principles because everyone's reaching out to me on Instagram, LinkedIn, social media, and I'm getting tired of writing out the same answer, so I'm going to write this and distill it down. We found out we were pregnant with our first daughter, Mickey. Yeah, Mickey, M-I-K-I, not Mickey as in Mickey the mouse. And we found out we was pregnant with our first daughter. And there was nothing like an impending deadline, to finish the book in warp speed. And perhaps you have Mickey, probably my wife, who's far better editor, to thank that this is not 500 pages. It's a nice, crisp, distilled 186 pages. So it's very easy to read. You can finish it in a weekend. And I submitted the manuscript. So Mickey was due to be born on November 30th. And by the way, Mickey's with us now. We're very fortunate that we've got our in-laws. Mickey's currently sleeping. Hopefully she's sleeping if the music at Tiki Bar isn't too loud. But she's here in love and life as a 6-month-old here in Barbados. We took her into the water earlier today. But anyway, she was due to be born on November 30th. I submitted the manuscript November 9th, 7 a.m. in the morning. And we were planning to do all these Broadway shows. We was like, this is our last few weeks as parents. And I got a call from my mum in Perth, Australia. And she said, Michael, there's a guy who's just checked in. She works as an aged care nurse, right? So she works with older people. And she said, this guy's just checked in, and he remembers you. I said, well, what's his name? She said, his name's Len. And this memory came to mind of this older guy, Len, from 20 years ago. I would get home from school. I would walk my dog down the park, and there was this older guy there. He had 2 walking sticks, and he had this dog. Literally, he called the dog Tramp because it looked like the dog from Lady and the Tramp, gray, wiry hair. And I said, is that Len? And she said, yeah. And I said, but he must have been about in his 80s at the time. How old is he now? And she goes, he's 105 years old. And he remembers you. And do you want to speak to her? And I was like, yeah. So we end up FaceTiming, which is pretty remarkable, New York to Perth. Len was born in 1917. He got married November the 11th, Remembrance Day in England, 1939. Shortly after that, when Europe was going to war, he found himself in France, right? And when the Germans were invading France, he found himself isolated. He lost his mission. And he goes up and he recounts this memory to me of this hill where he's walking up the hill trying to find his unit, and this great cloud comes above him. This huge cloud. He just sees this massive shadow, and he looks up, and it's 200 German planes flying above. And he thinks, this is it. I'm gone. But maybe because he looked like a tree, I don't know, one person, they didn't see him. But he ran around the hill to this abandoned village, sees an American car. He goes, you beauty, gets in his car, drives to the port of Calais. And I think he told me he's on the last boat leaving France before the Nazis took it over. And he's explaining to me how he goes through these mine-infested English Channel, right? Makes it to the other side. And his superior officer says, Len, I've got no more men to share, but Germans are going to be parachuting above us. And he goes, go to this town. You're the only one there. Mobilize the villagers and respond. So he goes to this village, and indeed, he says, soldiers were parachuting. Gets these villagers, and he describes it as like they've got pitchforks, and he's like got a few bullets, and they're like running down this hill. And I just said to him, I said, Len, like, how did you not lose hope? How did you not think it was all over? And he said to me, he said, no. We said to ourselves, we haven't got much, but we're not running away. We're not running away. We'll give it a go. We haven't got much. We're not running away. We'll give it a go. And after that call, turns out Mickey was anxious to come and see us all. So she was born November 20th, 10 days earlier. And then December 6th, I find out that it was Len's 106th birthday. And his daughter comes into the home and he says to her, haven't got much else to give. It's up to others to give it a go. And he passes away in his sleep. And I just think, we've got so much more than what Len had. We all do. And the question to grapple with, the challenge as we identify our goals is, are we willing to give it a go? And I know I am, I know you are, and I think Future Barbados is. And if that's not a good enough note to end on, in terms of stories and books, etc., there's so many, I cite many in the book, but one I really, really love is Saving Us by Catherine Hayhoe, which is the power of having conversations, because I think with many ideas, 90% is about showing up, and then in that last 10%, it's what you do with the audience once you've got them, and the power of conversation and dialogue. And so I often tell people, if they're looking to hone one skill, start there.
I am rarely speechless. We clearly rehearsed this a lot. So I was going to open for questions, but it feels like maybe we should have it in the conversations over there with some wine and some food. And so first off, I would like to thank you for coming down. I know you're on a crazy global book tour. Thank you for inspiring us to have these ideas, but also really inspiring us to make the impact. The validation for us at Future Barbados is important, but also more importantly is this community that we're trying to build and inspiring people to join us on this journey of making impact. So thank you for that. I want to say thank you to everybody here for coming. And this is not goodbye. This is see you outside. Let's have a conversation outside. Thank you those online who've joined us and who will see this recording after, because evergreen content will live forever on the internet. So I hope you caught my good side. Thank you for the team to put this together, Shara and this incredible team of streamers, the museum, the caterers, the bar. All of this is a machine that happens, and that I've trusted a team to pull this together and be audacious with this really cool setting and making it feel welcoming. And so I really want to encourage you all to have a new conversation and set your audacious goals tonight. Let us end with a selfie with everybody in the background.
And I do have to say, as well as being an incredible mother, multitasker, and wife, Wendy in the front here, she's also the chair of my marketing committee. And I know she'd be terribly upset because she always says, you do a great talk, people leave happy, and then you forget to mention where people can buy the book.
Yes. You can buy the book out there. Books are for sale outside. There's also on thehouseofamazon.com. They're also available, and
if you prefer it, I can sign books outside. We've got them there. And if you prefer to buy it on Amazon, I do have signed book plates. So you can order it and I can sign it and you can get it. Or it's also available on Audible. Apparently I wasn't famous enough yet to narrate my own Audible, but they managed to find a fellow Australian in New York who probably does a far better job than me anyway. So there you go.
Stand up. We're going to take a selfie. You got your camera here. Get a good iPhone. Everybody stand up. Stand up. Can you all see us? Can you all see me? All right. Lights on. All right. Wake up. Shake it on. Come closer. Where is our photographer who's going to capture us? You have to capture us getting the selfie, because that's what the cool people do. Hold on. All right. All right. Come in. Come this way. Let's go back rather than out. Let's go back. Come in, center. All right. Oh, this is looking good. Oh, I feel like I'm at the Grammys. Hey, hands up, yes. Woo! Thank you again, everyone. We'll see you outside for some drinks and some food. Have a great evening. Outro music.